Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audio download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/designrecharge. There's over 180 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. I'm currently listening. I have 2 hours and 14 minutes left of the 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. I want to tell you about another way to support the channel and get extra content. This week, I actually produced part 2 of the Sean Ferguson episode. So that is now available along with some other episodes. So there's a Surge series, there's Patreon power videos, as well as other content that you can get at that $5 level. And this week on Friday, we're doing a meetup with the patrons and we're going to talk about our 30-day challenge. Some of us are still in it. Some of us have just completed it. And we're going to talk about some of the things that we want to do in the future because we're going to do 2 more challenges and we're going to decide when those are. Trying to meet 4 times a year and do 3 challenges and see kind of what we did and how it helped our businesses. I want to tell you about my favorite way to build websites is with the Elementor plugin, and that works with almost any theme. I don't want to make a claim that it works with every theme, but it does work with almost any theme. It makes the themes invincible. It's really changed the way that I have been able to design websites. You can get that by you can use this affiliate link. I do get a tiny piece of the pie here. It's HTTP, I don't know why I'm saying that, but bit.ly, bit.ly/dr Elementor. And it's a capital D, capital R, ELEMENTOR. I think they're all underneath. If you scroll to the bottom. Today, we're going to be talking to Mandy Horton, who's a professor at the University of Central Oklahoma. And I'm excited to introduce her. So let's go to the show. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Design Recharge. Because I say everybody, because there's actually lots of people in the room, and I'm super thankful that they all came live. You can always come live. All you have to do is go to rechargingyou.com and sign up for the email list, and then you can come live too. And it's at 1:30 Central Time. You can do the math for all the other places that you are. But we've got D-Raj coming in from India. We got Beth Snyder from Kansas. We got a bunch of people from Alabama, Mississippi, Virginia, Western Michigan. Taylor's at the bottom. She's in Illinois. I always want to say she's in Indiana, but she's not. She's in Illinois. Anyway, so Mandy Horton is here from Oklahoma. She teaches at the University of Central Oklahoma, and they have a design degree that is just design. And so they have 3, really you have 4 design classes that are history of graphic design. And Mandy teaches all of them, right?
Well, I teach all of the graphic design history and the general design history courses, but there are some interior design history courses that are taught from another faculty member.
All right. So, but you have broken up what I had was Phil was one of my teachers. This is the Meg's book. His wife, Libby, saw the picture, and the new Meg's book is like white and beautiful and big, and I can't find it. It must be at home. I like to have multiple copies. But anyway, so we're going to talk about this, but we're also going to talk about some other books. And today, because this is a 3-part series, today is, you want to tell them what the years we're covering are?
Yeah, so History of Graphic Design 1 covers prehistory up to the Industrial Revolution. Okay,
so not only is it going to be some stuff that maybe you learned in art history, maybe it's a little controversial, but maybe not. And then tomorrow, just to kind of give them an overview of the whole week, tomorrow's going to be what years to what year?
So tomorrow we'll be covering the Industrial Revolution to 1945.
So when does constructivists come in?
Oh, they'll be tomorrow. We'll talk about them tomorrow.
Okay, good. I had some specific people asking for that. So my friend Shane in Ireland, he was like, I'd like to learn more about that. Okay, no, Kit, there is no test on Thursday, but I'm sure she could make one up for you if you'd like. All right, so then on Thursday, if we're covering up to the 1940s about, on Wednesday, then Taylor said she'll be out sick on Thursday. This is what's the beauty of being live, right? So this is, if you have questions, you can ask, and we're going to have some time here to do that. So, and day 3 is from the 1940s to present?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So can you tell us a little bit about your background? You're a designer, right?
Yes. I am a graphic designer by trade, and I decided to go back and get my MFA in design to become a professor. I decided that that was definitely a path I wanted to go down. And
Why?
Well, I wanted to have summers off. I later found out that you
Don't get summers off
summers
because your friends make you work, right?
Yeah, that plan was thwarted. So, but you know what? It was I made the decision, and it's actually been a wonderful decision. I love my job. I tell people all the time I have the best job in the whole world. Some people disagree with me because I have to put up with students. But you know what? I love it. So it's not for everybody. If you don't want to put up with students, then definitely not for you. But I love it. I love going to work every day. I try not to teach in summers anymore because I do like to have a little bit of time in between my research projects.
Okay, so that is what I love as well, but I end up filling my plate to the brim during the summer that I'm actually more busy in the summer than I am in the school year. But I think, so Catherine Moore is here. You know Catherine from CCAC,
Yes.
and so I just wanted you to know Catherine's here. All right, so we do have some professors in the room. We have some people that work at universities, and then we probably have some people who want to know more about design history. How does design history, how did you get passionate about wanting to teach design history?
Actually, while I was in undergrad, I took a design history course from a professor. His name was James Robert Watson. He's still around. He has since retired, but you can check him out. Google him. He taught design history at the University of Central Oklahoma, which is not where I got my degree from. I got my degree from Oklahoma State University, but he was the only design history professor around. So he went and taught at different universities. So he would teach design history. So he came to Oklahoma State and taught design history, but he also went to the University of Oklahoma and taught design history there as well. And that class was probably hands down my favorite class. And I had it in the evenings. And I remember walking home and walking back to my apartment, just thinking about all the things that he had told us about that day and just being really inspired to go out and create wonderful design work. And then when I was making this decision to go back and get my MFA and become a professor, that was really what I was thinking about, is I wanted to have that effect on my students. And that's when I sort of put 2 and 2 together that, yeah, I love design. I love designing, but design history really is my passion.
Okay, so we know that normally it's a 1 class course, and
if you have one.
Yeah, if one. Yeah, I think Carrie and Alan, who are my kids who are here, they didn't have design history. We just sprinkle it in. I think Alma does a much better job sprinkling it in than me. I'm terrible at it. I know I am. Hey, look, I'm going to sprinkle some business stuff in there for you, but probably not enough design history. Maybe more current history, I guess. But so how do you think so how long did you work as a designer?
Actually, I very, very short period of time. So I worked while getting my MFA as a designer. And then very shortly after completing my MFA, I think it was maybe 6 or 8 months, there was an opening at the University of Central Oklahoma where my predecessor, Jim Watson, taught. They were expanding their program. They had separated entirely from art. So art in very many universities teaches the foundations for design. And at UCO, they were splitting from art and teaching their own design foundation courses. And part of that was they wanted to emphasize design history as well. So they were creating 3 design histories where there previously had only been 1.
So just so you know, Will is here too, and Will is going back to school. He's going to RIT in the fall. Okay. And Rhonda Levy's here. Okay, and Rhonda, I believe, and Mason's here. Mason's in Tennessee. No, Mason's in Pensacola. I don't know what I'm thinking. Rhonda, I think. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We're going to be focused. I'm going to get it done. Okay, tell us where you're from when you come in late. But so I think that, Will is going back to school. I don't know if he loves design history, but there is a lot of us have. You're still working as a designer. You still have clients as a designer, right? Currently.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. So we'll just be encouraging Will for his RIT transition, I guess. All right. So why do you think design history, or how does design history play a role in your professional practice, not just your teaching?
Well, the thing about design history is, and I think there's a lot of aspects about it that play a role. But design history, if you look at it as the history of visual communication, basically having a background and an understanding of design history is really creating this sense of visual literacy for you. It creates this dialogue that has been going back, and we'll talk about this a little bit when we get into the meat of the little lecture I have prepared for you today. I mean, it just goes back to the dawn of man, and we still build on those items. And so, knowing where some of that comes from, or at least how far maybe it went back and how it's adopted and adapted through different cultures and different civilizations, I think that can have a big impact on your work. But then just knowing and understanding like all of that stuff, it can have an impact on your work. It can have an impact on whether or not, if you're planning on using, say, a color palette, like say you want to use red and black and white, and because those are just such strong, powerful colors, right? But that has associations often with the constructivists and communism. And is that really what you want to be saying for that organization? Knowing where those things come from and what associations that they can have for people, that can have a big impact on your work.
Absolutely. Okay. I totally agree. And Catherine's just loving your language that you're using, because visual literacy, well, I can't even say it, in communication class. Rhonda is also a teacher. She's in New York teaching, I remembered. Okay, so then why does design history matter to professional designers? I think you kind of gave us a hint there, right? It really is something, because it's psychological, that cultural implications of what design, but how could they use design history to enrich their studio practices?
Well, we always talk about, as design educators, about the idea and the concept, and that the concept is the key. And having this wealth of knowledge of the history and the theory and the criticism of design, where it's all came from, can help you to build an argument to support your ideas. And, you can have a really good idea, but if you can't talk about it, if you can't explain it, and you can't identify it to your client, then you might not be able to sell it, even if it is a really good idea.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, hey, look, I got finished with all my questions today. We broke them into 3 because we're doing something a little different, and Mandy's really going to take us through. But I wanted to just make sure, if you have to leave early, all of this stuff is going to be at rechargingyou.com/303, because this is episode 303. So if you just go to rechargingyou.com/303, we're going to be sharing some resources. This video will be there, and hopefully nobody will make us take it down, because no, we're not done already, Jason. So it's the quickest design recharge ever. It's history. I'm just kidding. So, but I just want you to know that if you're really interested, I just want to say these real quick in the beginning. This is not brought to you by UCO. Lord knows I teach at a university, but we don't have anything like this. So I think that sometimes you just want to do it. So you could actually there is history of design, which includes what, Mandy?
So history of design is our general history course, and it includes, some graphic design history, but also architecture and interior design and fashion design, photography, industrial design.
Okay. All right. So then that one is available online, but there's also History of Graphic Design 1, which is available online. Now, if you take the course, I'm not sure if they can CLEP the course, or whatever you call when you don't have to take the test. Like, I don't remember what that's called. We can't do
auditing.
Auditing. Yeah, we don't have any audits. Oh, everybody's like auditing. Thank you, guys. I don't have the great vocabulary here, or it's summer brain, I guess. So can they audit that course?
That is a good question, and I don't know for sure, but I think you can. I think you can.
Okay, so if this is so exciting to you today, this course is kind of online. So this is something she usually covers in 16 weeks, not 55 minutes, or really I'm cutting her down to about 46 minutes. So let's, without further ado, let's get going. And if you have a question, I am going to keep the chat up and I will just interrupt her. And so I know we got a bunch of people who came in late. I'm really glad to see Dave and Michael. I'm glad to see Mason too, and Jen. So I'm just glad you guys could make it. All right, so take it away.
Share your screen. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing my screen. There we go. Right, you guys can see it.
Yes.
Okay, so this is History of Graphic Design 1, and I like what Diane was calling it, the Cliff Notes version. So this is a very much a survey of a class that's a survey of Design History 1. So I'm going to go through some of this stuff pretty quickly. I think I have like 52 slides to go through. And
you got it. You can do it.
But so I made
20 in 20 minutes. You can do 55.
Right. So I'm gonna go through it pretty quickly, but I do want to encourage people to ask questions, to interrupt, and to say whatever it is comes to mind, as long as we don't go off on too many tangents. Then we can maybe stay on topic.
Dave Williams is catching it, and he's in the UK, so he's been a long-time listener, and now he just thought this was so good, he thought he'd catch it after work. So,
good.
All right, okay. Keep going.
So starting with History of Graphic Design 1. Well, where does design history start? And that's a big question, and it's certainly up for debate. And depending on where you go for university, what if they offer a design history course or not, they may start it in different places. A lot of people start it in the Industrial Revolution. A lot of people start it with the lithographic poster movements, and some of them may even start even later. I mean, the term graphic design or graphic designer wasn't even coined until 1922 by W.A. Dwiggins. So, I mean, if you started with the term graphic designer, we'd be starting this history in 1922. But if you look at the definition of what a graphic designer is, a lot of people take that a little bit deeper than just someone who makes logos and someone who designs brochures. And for those people, it's usually more about visual communication. And if you look at visual communication, it really started as early as cave paintings. This is an image of the Pech-Merle caves. I'm probably pronouncing that completely incorrectly. So this is from the Paleolithic period. And it's actually argued by Philip Meggs in the Meggs History of Graphic Design book, which is, there's a lot of history of graphic design books available now, but that one was really the first one. And it's really what a lot of people still turn to. It gets updated pretty frequently, and it's a really, really great text. If you don't have it, I do highly recommend purchasing it. But Philip Meggs makes the argument that the cave paintings were not, the first examples of art history. They are the first examples of visual communication and are therefore graphic design history. And so that's one of the first things I tell my students, and I talk to them about it. And I like to tell them for them to form an opinion about it, for them to inform themselves and think about, where do you stand on that argument? Do you agree? Do you disagree? And I like to present both sides of a story whenever possible, and then let them develop it.
I'd love to hear what people thought in the chat.
So I'm going to see if I can figure this out. Oops, nope, that's not what I wanted to do. Well, I guess that will work. But you'll notice the handprints above these horses in the Pech-Merle cave are created using a negative form. So there's an artist illustration or an artist rendering of how that actually happened. You see this rendering where the cavemen are putting their hands on the wall. Oh, that's an inappropriate term, but these men are putting their hand up on the wall and they're blowing pigment across the backs of their hands. And then when they pull their hands away, we have that impression of that negative imprint of the human hand. And so I had a colleague who referred to this as the first airbrush. And I think that that's probably a pretty accurate terminology. This is where the airbrush came from. So this is also, and when I argue it, the dawning of the history of illustration as well.
Mm.
So the other thing I want to point out is what else we can learn from early civilizations. A lot of people, when they start taking History of Graphic Design 1, they wonder why we're talking about all this stuff. How does this relate to what, they may have learned about this in an art history class, and how does this relate to what we learn as designers? And so I like to pull some examples from early civilizations where they use things like composition and hierarchy to communicate a message. And those are things we can learn from these early civilizations. So this is an Akkadian example. This is the stele of Narmer. It's often spelled different ways. I've provided an alternate spelling there for you. And in it, Narmer is the tallest figure there at the top. He's quite a bit larger than everyone else, but due to his placement, he's fairly central. He's a lot larger. We can tell he is the most important character in this this depiction, right?
Yeah.
So that's a compositional thing we can learn.
He's also facing in a positive direction.
That's true. That's true. I've actually never brought that up.
And everybody is except 4 people. Everybody else is facing positively.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the hero position, right? You look to the right is hero, left, not hero. Keep going.
Okay. So next example is an Egyptian example. This is the Palette of Narmer, and same thing. We have a strong use of hierarchy. Narmer is in the central panel there, and he's the largest figure. But the other thing that the Egyptians started using, which is quite interesting, is registers. So you can see there's this top register, right, where the name of Narmer is actually spelled out and his association with the gods. Then there's that middle panel where Narmer is, and then the bottom panel. So this all tells stories similar to registers in like a comic book.
Yeah.
To help tell that story. And the bottom panel is either it's open to interpretation. Sometimes people interpret it as his dead enemies, and some people interpret it as his enemies fleeing.
So
but this was,
oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. It's about a battle which unified Upper and Lower Egypt. And this is the back side of the panel, and we can see there's even more registers here. So again, the top panel is his name and his support from the gods. The second panel is them looking over the battlefield, and on the far right of that we have the enemies that have been slain. They're beheaded and their heads are between their legs. There's a couple more registers at the bottom there.
So did you know I have a friend who does archaeology? So she hunts for what do you call it? Vampires.
Oh.
That's what she says. So that's how they would kill people, and they would bury them with their heads taken off, and that was symbolic because they thought it was like a vampire couldn't be reborn, so they would put their heads. I just noticed that, and just from that anyway.
Okay.
Kind of.
No, I had not heard that, but it makes a lot of sense.
And so she does a lot of stuff in the Middle East, and then where she's doing her digs. Anyway, weird combination there. But Will says, does looking to the right only apply to cultures who read left to right? This is also a left to right culture, I guess, correct?
So, well, it kind of depends. Mostly left to right. Hieroglyphics were actually written sometimes left to right, top to bottom. That's one of the reasons they were so hard to decipher. So not entirely.
Huh. Okay, keep going.
Okay, let's see if I can. Oh, I can't seem to advance. What is going on? Okay, let's see if we
maybe
can.
Click on Zoom again just to make sure if you. Oh, now you advanced.
I advanced a little too far. Okay, maybe there was just a pause in my advancing skills. And then again, if we advance to the Greek cultures, this is the Diplon crater, and you can see there's registers here as well. And if you pay close attention, oh, sorry, it gets a little pixelated when I zoom in. This is actually a story, even though the figures are really simplified based on sort of somewhat geometric forms and using repeated patterns and repeated elements. It tells a story of a funeral, which I think is fairly clear. I mean, especially maybe it helps if you know that. that this is a funeral pyre. They're about to bury or have this state funeral for a military leader. And it's told in 2 registers again. The top register is the funeral. The bottom register is like the funeral procession or military parade, if you will. So the Greeks used that as well. Other things that we can learn from ancient civilizations is the idea of controlling the message. As designers, we are constantly trying to control messages as they go out and really, have something that is presented really, really clearly to our audiences. And we can actually look to, like, the Egyptians, for example, for controlling the message. In this statue of Menkaure and his queen, Menkaure wanted to be remembered as a very strong and athletic leader. So his statuary that was placed in his tomb reflected him as very, athletic, very well built. Was he actually? We don't know, but he definitely wanted to be remembered as such. And this also this has ties to their beliefs. Him as the pharaoh, the god and king, being very powerful and presenting this very powerful image in life, but also in death. So they had very strong beliefs about the afterlife, and of course they would mummify their body because they believed they could reuse their body, or they would use their body in the afterlife. But if for some reason that did not work, they would have these statues, so they could use the statue instead of the actual physical body. So it was very important for them to maintain this really strong, athletic, princely, kingly appearance, I should say. But there was this shift in ideology in Akhenaten's time period, and Akhenaten valued truth over everything else. So during his reign, people were depicted in statues as they actually were. So he's not as athletic looking. He's got a little bit of a pot belly. He looks, maybe a little bit thinner, has some feminine characteristics as well. But that actually ended with him. When he died, they returned back to the old way of, we want to look athletic and strong. So this was a very short time period where truth became more important and more valued than this, strong appearance. But this idea of controlling the message continues on into other cultures, and a lot of cultures will adopt some of those similar values. So this is a Roman statue of Augustus of Prima Porta, and he actually died in his 70s, and this was commissioned after his death. So, they could have done a statue of him, in his 70s, but they chose not to do that. They wanted to, convey him how he wanted to be remembered. He wanted to be remembered as a strong leader, as an authoritative leader. This is an oratorical pose, so he's also dressed in military garb. So all these things that he wanted to be remembered as are placed into the statue, which we still study and know today. So I guess you could say he is doing a good job of controlling the message from beyond the grave.
Mm-hmm.
But the Greeks and the Romans, the Romans were really, really good at, let's call this controlling the propaganda, or controlling the message propaganda. So they had lots of structures that commemorated wars and battles. There's the altar of Augustinian peace. There's the Arch of Titus and Trajan's column are some of the most, probably prominent examples of what we could call, again, propaganda or controlling the message. So this is the Arch of Titus, which is a pretty interesting piece. It's half architecture, half sculpture, and inside of it is a relief called the Spoils of Jerusalem. And this is the Romans. They sacked this, Jewish culture, and they took away a lot of their cherished items, the Great Menorah. I think there's even some people that think that this was when the Ark of the Covenant was maybe stolen. I could be making that up entirely. But basically, this is what they were conveying to the Roman people. We've won this battle. We've carried off their goods. We are in charge now. We're the leaders. We're the great people. and we deserve all of the great things that are coming to Rome.
Brian said the second temple destruction was about 70 AD. He question mark.
That sounds about right.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure. And I tend to, you'll notice on some of these images where I'm giving you guys the dates, I sometimes round up or round down just to make it a little easier for people to remember.
What's CE?
CE is Common Era.
Oh.
And that's the new, so the new
so instead
way
of BC?
So there's BCE, which is before the Common Era, and then there's CE, which is the Common Era.
Oh, okay.
So like AD.
Gotcha.
But this is not necessarily how people would want to be remembered today. It's considered a bad thing to go into cultures and civilizations and destroy their way of life, if you're a good person anyway. So that was okay for the Romans, and it's not something we would want to be remembered by today.
It's funny though, because they were seeing themselves in the positive, and they're still facing right. I'm just bringing that up again.
Yes,
people facing right.
Good,
I always think I see that in advertising. It'll be like an insurance person, and they're looking left. I'm like, like they're looking away. They can't even look at their type. I'm like, you should at least face your type, I think, because do you know what I mean? Like, I hate don't call me, right? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Anyway, but it is, so maybe it's still Western sort of culture is facing right, but the Egyptians were facing right.
Well, so then the next thing I want to talk about is making marks. And what we have to realize is that it became very clear very quickly that making marks were very valuable because they last longer than the spoken word. I can tell you something and you might remember it for a minute or 2 days or 5 years, but when you're gone, it's gone. Making marks, they are lasting. You can talk to someone who is not there physically, and you can also talk to someone who is not there through time, right? So some of the earliest examples of mark making are pictographs. And those are elementary pictures or sketches that directly represent the item depicted. So in a pictograph, a drawing of an ox is an ox. I have a little example of that here. We have an ox and mountains. And in this drawing, that's what that means. An ox is an ox, the mountains are the mountains. But you can go beyond that. And the next step of that would be an ideograph. And ideographs are pictures or symbols that are meant to convey thoughts or ideas. So in this instance, if you see an ideograph of an ox, it's actually going to mean perhaps food instead of just an ox. And a great example of an ideograph is the skull and crossbones, which means danger or poison. It conveys more of an idea. It doesn't literally mean a skull and crossbones. And then the next generation of that too, and I'm very much oversimplifying this, is the phonogram. And the phonogram is a graphic character or symbol that represents a spoken sound or a combination of letters that can represent a sound. And this is where we get the modern alphabet. We rely on phonograms. And this is just a brief history of the letter A through different cultures and civilizations. You can see how this actually evolved from the ox head, eventually turned on its side and then got flipped upside down, and that's where the capital letter A comes from. And then if we go back to writing, where does actual writing come from? And not just symbols and pictograms and ideograms, but where does the tradition of writing come from, and where did alphabets evolve? Cuneiform tablets, they were developed by the Sumerians as early as 2800 BCE. And these were tablets that were used mostly to conduct business. And so a lot of these have lasted over time. There's still tons of examples of cuneiform tablets, a lot of them in museums. And they were mostly used for ledgers and accounting. So a lot of these have actually been deciphered. And so ledgers, accounting, and sometimes recipes. I actually heard a story of a recipe that was translated, and they actually went ahead and made the recipe, and it still worked. The recipe worked and everything.
Wow.
So, yeah, but these are very mundane, but it also shows how where the need for writing came from. Writing really evolved to help us conduct business, to exchange and sell goods with people. The next example I want to talk about is hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics were a sacred language, and it was limited. Only the highest levels of Egyptian society were allowed to learn and read hieroglyphics. So that would have been the pharaohs and the priests only. But the Egyptians quickly realized that writing was an essential tool. It was a great tool for communication. So they actually ended up developing 3 different writing systems. So originally they had the hieroglyphics, and then they added the hieratic writing system. And that too was based on social status. So eventually they had to have another writing system, which is called Demotic, which was for more everyday people. And the Rosetta Stone, which was found by Napoleon's troops in Egypt, is the key to actually deciphering hieroglyphics. It actually has the same. Do you have a question?
Yep. I'm going to start raising my hand so I don't interrupt you. So Catherine actually has a question. How do you spell heretic or what, and then demotic or whatever?
It's Hieratic. And then the demotic is Demotic.
Oh, she got that one right.
Oh, good.
Good job, Catherine. Okay, keep going.
The neat thing about the Rosetta Stone is it has the exact same inscription on it in 3 different written languages. So the top of it is in hieroglyphics, and then the middle portion is in Demotic, and then the bottom portion is in Greek. And it's this stone tablet, because it has the exact same inscription on it 3 times, that led them to actually be able to decipher hieroglyphics.
That's cool.
And that's why Rosetta Stone, the term Rosetta Stone, is often sort of used synonymously with like the key or the code to something, code breaking. And that's why the popular language software Rosetta Stone, where they got their name from.
Cool.
And if we continue down this path of the development of written languages, our next advancement is going to be the Phoenicians. And the Phoenician alphabet is actually very similar to than what we would see with the Greeks and the Latins. So,
like, what year are we talking about?
Oh, you did have to ask me that one. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Sorry.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Okay, well, we can look it up later.
Yeah.
I'll look it up in my Meg's book while you do.
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. So the Phoenician alphabet, if you look at the Alph, the first letter over here on the far right, that's going to eventually become the Alpha, the letter A. So there's a lot of similarities, but some of these are slightly rotated and slightly shifted. And then when the Greeks adopted this from the Phoenicians, they took, even though they had a very different language, they basically took those symbols, made some very minor changes, made some additional symbols to accommodate their needs, but it still works. And this is an example of an early Greek inscription. And I like to show this one in particular because in early Greek, they wrote in a method called bistrophodon, which means as the ox plows. So instead of writing left to right like we write today and like more modern Greek would be written, they wrote left to right and right to left and left to right like an ox would plow a field. Oh, and the way you know how to read it is if you look closely at these letters. When you're supposed to read right to left, the letters are backwards.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's great for dyslexics.
Maybe.
Well, one line.
Yeah.
I mean, but who knows? I wasn't like being funny. I was being honest, serious.
Yeah. I don't
know.
Honestly know.
But it would be really hard for like me, I think, to be, but it's, I guess, what you're used to, but it's just pushing us language wise of what we can decipher and read. So maybe we're just doing it the lazy way.
That is probably true. I think that a lot of the reasons we've simplified our language as much as we have is because of laziness.
And the Phoenicians somewhere between 1000 and 1050 BC.
That makes sense. So then the Romans adopted the Greek writing system, but from the Etruscans. They got it from the Etruscans. And so this is where our modern day alphabet is based off. It's based off of the Roman Latin alphabet. And this is an example of the Latin alphabet in probably its highest, its pinnacle. These are the square Roman capitals that they're known for. This is from the base of Trajan's column. And you can see how really, really structured and refined this writing style is. But this was really sort of like hieroglyphics. It was really reserved for special occasions, special uses. And a more day-to-day writing system was called rustic or rustica, and it looked a little bit more like this. So it was the same alphabet, you know, not a major change here as we saw with the Egyptians, but there was more of a higher level style or format and a lower level everyday format. Okay, so let's, if you're ready to move on.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, we're going to talk about illuminated manuscripts next. And I think most people, when they hear the term illuminated manuscripts, if they're familiar with that term, they're thinking of the beautiful illustrated books that were produced by the church through the medieval era. And so they may not think about things like the Egyptian Book of the Dead being an illuminated manuscript, but it is. These were scrolls typically, and not the books, you know, that were stitched and sewn together, the more modern day illuminated manuscripts. But they were in fact illuminated manuscripts because they were handmade. That's what a manuscript is, or handwritten. And illuminated means it's essentially illustrated. So we have illustrations that accompany text for visual communication, for clarity. Not everybody could read the hieroglyphics. Remember, especially hieroglyphics were regulated to just the priests and the pharaohs. So everyone else would have to gain an understanding of what was happening in this scroll by the images, because they could not read that sacred writing. And then, of course, if we're going to talk about illuminated manuscripts, I do need to share with you guys some examples of more the traditional Christian manuscripts. The Book of the Kells is a Celtic manuscript that is often considered to be the finest example of illuminated manuscript in any culture at any time. And part of the reason for this is how extensive these illuminations, these illustrations are, but also the quality of the materials they use, the variety of the materials they used. A lot of early manuscripts used black ink, they used red ink, they used brown inks, and maybe shades of brown and tan, because those were the easiest colors to come by. But if you look closely at this example of the Book of Kells, there's blues and there's greens and there's yellows and purples, and you know, probably the purples are really actually blue. And the blue, for example, was made from a mineral that came from Afghanistan. So I think that shows you how important and how dedicated these monks and these scribes were that were creating these illuminated manuscripts. If they were, you know, importing materials to make ink all the way from Afghanistan into, you know, Ireland and Scotland and the places where these manuscripts were made. I think that shows the importance and the value to them.
And sometimes they would wouldn't they use gold or something?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So they would use gold leaf. They would use gold ink sometimes. Those are different processes. And so sometimes people consider the term illumination not merely to be a reflection of the illustrations that it contains, but illumination from the gold that was often used either in the text with gold inks or gold leaf. Sometimes that would be on the covers as well. Go ahead.
So Patricia said she saw the Book of Kells in Dublin. How big is this and Patricia lives in Portland?
Well, maybe she can tell us. I have not actually seen this in person. I imagine it's, you know, it's a good size, bigger, like a coffee table size book. But maybe she can tell us a little bit better.
I'll tell you when she types it in.
Okay.
Okay, keep going.
Okay, so the next illuminated manuscript I want to share with you is another one I think you may not be aware of, may not have heard of. It's the Codex Mendoza. This is a illuminated manuscript from the Aztec civilization. Wow. And this was made in 1542. And again, it's a combination of text and images to relate the story. And in this instance, the story, it was examples of Aztec culture and Aztec life. And it was intended to be given to the new Spanish ruler, King Charles V of Spain, because they had subjugated the Aztecs, and the Aztec leaders wanted him to understand and value their culture. So they gave him this book in hopes that he would have a better understanding and value of their culture. I don't think it worked.
It's funny how the little people don't have pants on, and the other people have really crazy costumes and shoes.
Yeah, I think this is all, I don't remember exactly which page I pulled out, but I think this is all their ceremonial garb. So he was explaining the different ceremonies that these would be used for, right, and what it all means, and what part of their beliefs and culture it tied to.
And also, I don't know if you can see my mouse. Can you see my mouse? Probably not. But these little squares, and like the one over the first guy on the left, and then there's another. So it's like this patterning. Maybe that had to do with the outfits or something that trimmed, or, this contrast on the far right. There was like a triangle that's black and a triangle that's white or tan or something. I don't know.
I wish I could read this. I think it would be fascinating to read.
Yeah.
So the church, especially in Western society, had a lot of control over how writing was used and developed. For example, church and the monks, they made a lot of the books through the medieval era. Towards the later end of the medieval era, you started seeing universities, and they started making their own books as well. But because of that, the church controlled a lot of the content, and most of the books that were being produced were religious in nature. There weren't very many secular books. There were some, but not very many. So things like ideas for punctuation, that came from the church and from monks. They actually developed punctuation through the development of music notation. They also developed certain ligatures, and actually they started combining letter forms. And it initially was kind of a beautiful thing, but it eventually got out of hand, and almost every single word became like one long ligature, and it started to get really hard to read. So that's going to lead to a reform that I'm going to talk about here in a minute.
Oh, and Patricia said that it was 10 by 13, and it was spread across a long glass case, if she recalls. But she did look it up. She didn't remember that by heart.
Yeah, well, and I think that's about like the format of like a large table, coffee table book, which is kind of how I've always imagined it. Like I said, I've never seen it in person, and I don't often keep dates and sizes locked into my brain as well as I probably should.
Right.
But the ampersands, that also came from this development, which was originally a ligature of the letters E and T, et or and. And if you look carefully, and I didn't include an example of that, if you look carefully in an ampersand, you can often find that E and the T in the symbol. And you might win on, like, I don't know, Jeopardy or something like that by knowing that term.
I'm glad you told us.
So around the year 800, Charlemagne was reigning, and the Holy Roman Emperor, and he decided he needed to reform writing practices. This is when sort of that culmination of all of those bad habits that were being developed of creating all of these ligatures and running all the letters together. So he developed his own place for making illuminated manuscript, a scriptorium, and he also refined letters. He had his own sort of writing style made, and that was known as Caroline Minuscules. And this was actually the earliest example of what we would call lowercase letter forms today. And of course, the terms lowercase and uppercase, they actually come from printing, because you kept letters in cases, and the majuscules, or the uppercases, were kept in the uppermost case, and the minuscules or the lowercase letter forms were kept in the lowercase. So we don't actually have that terminology yet. We haven't gotten to the printing press. So minuscules, Caroline minuscules, and you can see there's some beautiful letter forms here already being developed. I love those two-story G's.
Mm-hmm.
So the church ended up creating a lot of educational images for a very, very long time, especially through the entire Middle Ages, when there wasn't a lot of book production. Book production was very, very slow. Everything had to be done by hand. They were very expensive. So there wasn't a lot of literacy, was very, very sparse. So in order to communicate these messages to the people, they would often hire artists and sculptors and various artisans to create images that the public could see. And they would help tell the story, help tell Bible stories, help tell the story of Jesus. And so this is an example from the Romanesque era. And this is one of, I think, the first named artists that we have. Yes?
I have my hand up. They can't see us, but anyway, it will be in the recording. Is this, when does stained glass? Because that's also, I thought, was literacy based.
Yes. Stained glass becomes really prominent in I think during towards the end of the Romanesque era, the beginning, it really becomes predominant in the Gothic era. So yes, it was all of that was intended to help convey the stories of the Bible to the people. So this is an example of the Last Judgment. This is in the Cathedral of Saint-Lazare, and we have Jesus in the center. Again, hierarchy is used. He's the largest figure. He's the central figure, and he's surrounded by a mandorla, or a body halo, that kind of gives him this celestial space, from everyone else. And the saved are on his right, and the damned are on his left. But there's also this scene where on his left-hand side, our right, when we're looking at the right-hand side, of angels and demons weighing souls to determine if they go to hell or not. It's actually pretty dark. Wow. But it helps tell the story, and it would have been an educational image, and hopefully help convey to the masses the message that the church was trying to convey at the time. And that's another interesting thing to look at, is how the message has changed through the church. Because in the earliest days of the Christian church, it was very underground, so they used a lot of hidden symbolism. They borrowed images from the Romans and from Roman pantheon to try to hide the story of Jesus. But then as it grows and it escalates, then we get these really dark images, and you need to be saved, and it changes again, and it shifts throughout time. So it's really interesting to pay attention to those stories. But a lot of this relates to symbolism, and that's another thing that we can learn from art history, from design history. How do we use symbolism? How has symbolism been used over time, and how can we incorporate that into our designs? And there's a lot of examples, and I'm not going to get into a lot of these, unfortunately, just because we don't have time. But of course, there's a lot of Greek and Roman symbolism that we still use today. Athena was associated with the symbol of the owl, and she was also considered very wise. And we still use that today. I mean, if you go and pick up a graduation card, it's got a hat and an owl on it. There you go, right there. So those connections are still being made and used today. And then I have this example of the Holy Trinity. This is from the Italian Renaissance, from Masaccio. And the full title there is at the bottom: Holy Trinity with the Virgin, St. John the St. John the Evangelist, and donors. But at the bottom of this scene, and there's a lot of symbolism in this, and I'm not going to get to it, but at the bottom of the scene is a memento mori, a reminder of death. And this became a really prominent symbol that was used throughout the Renaissance. Very often it would be even just a skull. This is a full skeleton. But memento moris are still very popular today, and it's a terminology that you would be, as a designer, be expected to understand and know. So it's very important to talk about these. And this is also something that is relevant in other cultures. There are a lot of similar ideas and practices in different cultures. For example, the Day of the Dead in Mexico honors and celebrates the dead. So definitely something to keep in mind. Another piece, I love talking about the Arnolfini wedding portrait when it comes to symbolism. This piece is so just rich with symbolism, and I'm not going to get into all of it today, but if you don't know about the Arnolfini wedding portrait, which is also known as the double wedding or the double portrait, because there's a controversy about whether or not it actually is a wedding. So I like to tell people about that as well. But like the dog in the picture is a symbol of fidelity. The shoes being removed is a symbol of perhaps one of the arguments that it is a wedding portrait, because this is a religious, or it has religious significance. Removing the shoes is something you would do in a holy space. There's lots and lots of symbolism here. And even when I talk about this in class, we don't have time to get into all the symbolism because there's just so much.
And then he painted himself in the mirror,
yes.
right?
Yes. If there's a mirror on the back wall between the couple, and in really good examples or really good pictures, you can actually zoom in on that, and you can see Jan van Eyck painted himself, and I think there might be one other person as well in the mirror. But there's a lot of, so I definitely teach design history from a Western perspective, but I try to bring other cultures in as well. I think there's a lot of value in that. So like in my classes, I'll talk about Buddhist symbolism and Hinduism symbolism, and I talk about Islamic symbolism and how that is conveyed or translated. And especially when it comes to Islamic, I talk about the idea of aniconism, which was basically the theory or the ideology that they were not allowed to convey humans or Allah in visual depictions, right? But that that hindered them in some ways, but it also, because they imposed these really strict limitations, that it actually challenged them to come up with creative solutions. So they had some amazing design elements. They use a lot of geometric patterns and a lot of arabesques and floral patterns, and then calligraphy is often incorporated into Islamic design, and they're very beautiful solutions. And I like to share that with students, especially early on, because a lot of them are struggling with, I have these limitations for this project that I'm working on, and it's so hard because I can't work within these limitations. And then if I tell them this story and we look at some of the examples of Islamic design and how beautiful they are, I'm like, yeah, that's a challenge. Accept that challenge. They did, and they created some beautiful, beautiful work.
And it's just part of design.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to get to the history of printing. I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly. Printing did not start with Gutenberg's press. What? This is the Hittite cylinder seals. The Hittites were a civilization in Babylon, or Babylonia. Or Mesopotamia. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I don't know the difference. Whatever you tell me.
The Babylons were also a Mesopotamian culture. Anyway, so they use these little cylinders, and they had carved designs on them, and then they would roll them in wet clay to create, basically they use this as a trademark, if you will, like a signature or a trademark. And these were very difficult at the time to copy. So it would be, it was like a trademark. It would be very difficult to copy. And then if you look closely at these cylinders, a lot of them have holes in the bottom, and that would be so that they could put like a leather thong on them and then carry them around with them everywhere, or wear them around their neck. And it would be something you kept on your item or on your person so that it couldn't be stolen and replicated or used for nefarious purposes. But this was an early printing method. Granted, they weren't printing with ink and paper. They were printing on usually wet clay.
Because?
Why were they printing on wet clay?
Yeah.
Well, it lasted. You could fire it and it would last forever, or for a very long time. I mean, if you look at the cuneiform tablets, that's what, and, they were using the resources they had. They didn't have a lot of paper. Well, paper was invented much later by the Chinese in particular. It was much more accessible. Other early, things that were written on would be papyrus by the Egyptians. That was something that they had pretty readily and handily. Then other things they would write on animal skins, parchment, and vellum. But that was pretty expensive.
Yeah.
You still hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So the Chinese, they also had some early printing examples, and these are called chops. We would think of them as stamps probably. And they would have a raised portion that they would ink, and then they would press onto the paper, and they would use this sort of as identification purposes, official seals and things like that. So that's an early printing method. The Chinese also used a lot of woodblock prints. This is an early example of paper money. The Chinese developed paper money pretty early, 1000 CE. So they were one of the first civilizations to be printing paper money and disseminating graphically printed images to the masses. So I think that's pretty exciting.
Totally.
Also, in terms of woodblock printing, this is the oldest dated printed piece. This is the Diamond Sutra. And again, this is a scroll, but basically this long scroll was printed using carved wood blocks, and they had just blocks that they would print the scroll in. This is Teachings of Buddha, Diamond Sutra.
Wow.
And this is much, much later, but it's probably one of the most memorable examples of ukiyo-e, so I'm going to show this piece in particular. But the Japanese were also using woodblock printing techniques, and they were really creating some advanced techniques in terms of color and their use. And if you ever have a chance to go see a ukiyo-e exhibit, I highly recommend it because they are phenomenal. But the earliest examples would have just been black and white. They might have been hand tinted. It's going to be later on that they started developing these really colorful prints, like the Hokusai's Great Wave that we see here. Also, movable type was invented by the Chinese. These are clay movable types, so not lead that we think of. And it was developed around 1041, 1048. It didn't catch on because the Chinese have 3,000 to 4,000 characters. So it was really hard to use. It was a really difficult format for them. And so it didn't necessarily catch on at that time. And because of that, I think we don't really attribute them to the development of movable type, but they did. They developed movable type. The next development is, of course, the printing press, which we attribute to Gutenberg. And this is an example. So there's actually a controversy here you may not know about. Gutenberg developed the printing press around 1440, 1450. But around the same time, there was a man in Haarlem in the Netherlands, Lorenz Janszoon Koester, who also developed a printing press. And so there's this argument about like who actually developed it first, but pretty much in Western society, we've already accepted that Gutenberg did it first, so he gets all the credit. But if you go to this town in the Netherlands, there's a statue for him. He's holding a little piece of metal type in the statue, and basically that statue indicates that he developed the printing press first. It makes that argument. And the interesting thing about the printing press is the things that Gutenberg needed. He needed ink, he needed movable type, he needed a press, and he needed paper. So movable type that had already been invented by the Chinese. Yeah, he refined processes, and certainly he made them out of metal instead of clay. Yes.
How do you spell Coaster's last name?
Coster. Lorenz, like Lorenz is what it looks like. Lorenz Coaster. Anyway, so the ink had been around for a really long time, but he found he had to incorporate oil into the ink so that it would adhere to the metal surface. Movable type, again, had already been around. And the printing press, the idea for the printing press, this was not something that he developed all on his own. It came from a wine press. And people had been pressing wine using these giant wooden presses for a really long time. And then he needed paper or something to print on, and he generally printed on animal skins of parchments and that sort of vellum and that sort of thing. So basically, this is not like this, groundbreaking discovery in the sense like that none of these things already existed, but this is how most inventions happen, right? Is you take things that are already around. We already have ink, we already have movable type, we already have these presses and parchment, and then you find a new way to combine them and to develop something new that is fantastic. I mean, this changed the way people lived and communicated.
So Fred has a question.
Sure.
He said, wasn't Belgium, now I'm not really good with my geography, so he said he's in Belgium. He said, wasn't Belgium really connected to the printing press? Just curious what their relationship was in all this.
I actually don't know about Belgium's relationship to the printing press at all. And so if he wanted to tell me.
Belgian history, and you can add this in to us, Fred.
Yeah.
Fred's 16 and he loves design. Mason says wine. That explains why I'm still a print designer. Okay, keep going.
Okay, so the development of the printing press led to a greater dissemination of information. It led to things like the Reformation, the splitting of churches, and this is an example of a broadside that was more on the side of Martin Luther, and it depicted the Pope and his allies in a negative light. And again, this is another example of, I really, really wish I could read this, because I bet it's probably pretty exciting. I think that they call him some not nice names, and his compatriots not nice names as well. Other technologies that we talk about are, we talk about engraving and how that advances society. But let's talk about typography. This is actually my last subject that I'm going to cover today, so we'll try to go through this pretty quickly. Textura. Textura was a writing format that was developed by scribes, generally by monks, and it was developed for ease. So these had very upright forms initially. Different areas had different formats and different styles. Some of them would become a little bit more open and a little bit rounder. Those are often, they have different names for these. So like you'll hear the name textura, you'll hear the name black letter, because of the black appearance that it gives a page if it's full of black letter type. You'll hear rotunda, fraktur. So there's a lot of names associated with textura and the different styles that it can manifest in, but it was predominantly used by scribes, and it would have been very, very legible to them at the time. It's very difficult for us to read because we're not used to this format. And then when Gutenberg invented the printing press, if you want to believe that story, if you want to go with Lawrence Koester, we can talk about that. He didn't change the way things were written. In fact, he was trying to create a printed book that looked like it was handmade. So he very much copied, can you see my cat's tail?
Yes.
So he created a typeface that copied the writing of scribes at the time. So when Gutenberg started printing, and we have these early broadsides, a lot of them use textura or black letter forms. From there, they returned during the Renaissance to more of a Roman style format. And so this is the example I'm giving is by Aldus Manutius, and he was very much impressed with Greek writing, or the Greek style, and he produced a typeface called Bembo, along with his type designer, who was Francisco Griffo, and then they also collaborated to create the first italics. And the first italics were not intended to complement, Roman typefaces like how we use them today. In fact, they were used completely independently for small pocket-sized books, and it was intended to kind of compress the type so that they could make books smaller. So they were used entirely on their own, not how we use them today. Our next advance.
Hey, you didn't talk about italics.
I did.
Oh,
Did I not? Was with the pocket-sized books?
Because well, one thing I always say, it was about money, because this is me throwing in the business. You know this part probably, but they did italics. Italics came to be because they were trying to fit more type on a line so that they could use less paper and make more money.
Yes. Yes.
That's what I wanted you to tell them.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay,
Keep going.
And then this is one of the first type manuals, Champfleury by Geoffrey Torrey. He was French. My French is very weak, so I'm probably pronouncing all of this completely incorrectly. But he took these very Renaissance ideals and applied them to typography in this first typographic manual. And there are a couple of other typographic manuals that come out during History of Graphic Design 1. We're not going to be able to get into all of them, but I wanted you to see he had these really elevated ideas about type and how, compared to human anatomy and how everything worked in the natural systems. And it's pretty weird and it's pretty neat to look at.
Those are cool.
And then we have the first example of a typeface that is created using a grid. Previously, typefaces were based on the writing of scribes. And of course, this still has that basis of what has come before. But now the letter forms are based off of grids and mathematical proportions and clean geometry and circles. And that's the Romain du Roi, the Roman of the king. So this was for official use only. And the neat thing about that is anything the king did, the kings and queens of France did, became very much in vogue, very much fashionable. So people started copying this. And so this style of typeface became very, very prevalent. Also around this time, two Frenchmen, Fournier and Didot, they developed consistent units of measurement and type sizes. So previously, type sizes were not consistent from printing house to printing house. And if you went to one and asked for a petit roman, it might be the equivalent to like an 8-point font today. But if you went to a different printing house and asked for the same thing to be printed in a petit roman, it might be closer to a 10-point or a 12-point font. There was no consistency there. So these individuals came up with the idea to unify and to use units of measurement to define sizes of type instead of just names, which I'm sure we all appreciate today. William Caslon was one of the first big typographers in England, and he developed his typeface in roughly 1728. This is a specimen of that, Caslon, which is still accessible and used today. And it was very, very, very popular for a very long time, and it said not necessarily because it was beautiful, but because it was really functional. Benjamin Franklin came to the United States to learn how to set type and to be a printer. And when he came back to the United States, he brought Caslon back with him. And it was at his recommendation that the Declaration of Independence be set in Caslon. So
he brought the typeface Caslon, or he brought the person Caslon?
He brought the typeface. I'm so sorry. Okay. The typeface back with him. Yeah. Other developments when it comes to typography, we start getting to design much more and more elegant typefaces. So John Baskerville designed this typeface in roughly 1772, which again is known as Baskerville today. We still know it and still love it. It had increased thicks and thins, and he had to use better inks and better paper because the thin lines would sometimes get lost in the printing process. So he refined ink and he refined paper in order to be able to use these delicate forms. And so what we're seeing during this transitional period is, those thicks and thins really starting to be pushed, whereas earlier Roman typefaces would have had very even forms. You wouldn't want to have too many thins. And actually, as Baskerville and these typefaces also fell out of fashion eventually, people would complain that the thins were too thin and they hurt their eyes. So these go back and forth in popularity. In 1785, Bedoni developed his typeface, which is still, again, widely used today. You see it on in a lot of logo designs. Again, increasing thick and thin. And here we have a hairline serif. It's really, really delicate and really thin. This is often referred to as the first modern typeface. And it's, it's often used today to convey elegance. So a lot of clothing brands use Bedoni. Wow, I got through all of my images and I think we ran over. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. We always run over. Okay. Are you done?
Yeah, that's.
Well, hit stop screen share.
Okay. Woo.
Okay. Yay. Okay, guys. So I won't talk as much, but we do have 2 questions for tomorrow that I'm going to ask her in the beginning. And, and then 3 questions on, Thursday. So thank you guys for coming. Thank you, Mandy. We can't wait to learn more. I'm sorry I was reading the chat and I feel really bad because I'm like, hey, you didn't talk about italics. And you're like, yes, I did. You should be listening. Right?
I think you were expecting me to explain it a little bit more in the money saving sense. And I was talking about it in terms of conserving space for pocket editions.
Yeah. But yeah,
same idea.
But it's funny because, some kid asked me last year and they were like, oh, so my colleague Matt, he's like, oh, he's a great illustrator, and Alma, Alma is great lettering and typography, and she's like, what do you do? And I'm like, I don't know, maybe business. So I was like, but I do really think about the money, and I think about how they were cutting corners, and that was really a huge money saver. And I know I've taught my kids that, so I think it's funny. So,
well, if you want another money-saving example from history, the Gutenberg Bible, also referred to as the 42-line Bible, used 40 lines on the first, I think, 9 pages, 41 pages on the 10th page, and then after that, they all used 42 lines, and that was basically to bring the cost down so they could use less paper. So they put more lines on a page to reduce the cost.
Anyway, thank you. All right. So Rhonda says she wants a link, but I don't know what the link is. Great review. Everything in the chat won't be there today, but I do have an intern and she's putting the chats and making the show notes for me. So it's going to be much better to go back and see these. So I don't know what link you need, Rhonda, but we'll get it for you if you put it. So I put down there if you want to get the show notes, again, rechargingyou.com/303, and tomorrow will be 304 and then 305. 304 doesn't exist yet. Well, it does now, but you know what I mean. Okay, that's what she was wanting. So I want to make sure that you guys, Mandy said it was okay to share her email. Obviously, she works at a public institution. You could get it anyway, but I'm going to go ahead and give it to you. And you're happy to answer questions right?
Yeah. So if at any point in time this brings up a question, you want to know a little bit more, I'm happy to answer questions. Or if I mention a book or a resource and you want to know more about that, feel free to email me and I'm happy to share that with you.
And I will try to get links to the books and things like that in the show notes as well. So I just want you guys to know ways that you can connect with Mandy, which she does often write about design. She also has a beautiful dog as well as her cat. She did not post, but sometimes your dog ends up in your Instagram. So if you go to Instagram.com at Unicorn Loves Trouble, and I didn't say her email address. So if you're listening on wherever you get your podcast, AHORTON, the number 4 at UCO.edu, because University of Central Oklahoma.
Please, absolutely. If you have a question, be sure to email me. And so for those of you who, I know some of you are teachers and you teach this stuff. I think Kent teaches design history. If you want to connect and share ideas back and forth or correct me on any mistakes I might have made, feel free to do that as well.
Anyway, we'll see you guys tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat place. I don't think that's how that goes, but think it's same bat time.
Same bat time, same bat channel.
Oh, yeah. Bat channel. That's right. Anyway, well, whatever. I always messing something up. Bat station. That's right. Well, bat station. I'll tell you, anyway, thank you guys for all the new patrons that are coming and that have joined. I really, really appreciate it. You can sign up to support the show at patreon.com/Diane Gibbs. And if, just to remind you, so tomorrow is Design 2. So again, the Cliff Notes version of her Design 2 class, which normally takes 16 weeks. And that's, again, just remind them what it's covering, what years.
So that we'll cover the Industrial Revolution up to 1945.
Okay. And then the Thursday is the modern, or more up to today. So we'll cover David Carson and anybody from 1946 on, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we will see you guys tomorrow. I just want to tell you all, thank you so much. Please hit like. If you're watching this on YouTube, give it a like. Give me a comment underneath. I do answer the comments. Start a question. Let's have a conversation. Hey, I just wanted to tell you thanks for coming to the show today, or listening, or whatever you're doing, watching right now. Go ahead, if you're on YouTube, hit like. If you're listening through your podcast or MP3 player, give it a share. Share it with somebody who you think needs to know. And there will be 2 other episodes that go with this. This will be a playlist. So you can have the second one and the third one, and they probably will come out really close together. And you can always support the show, even for $1, by giving at patreon.com/Diane Gibbs. And that's DianeGibbs. Just one in Diane. Anyway, I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for coming. And you can also, just using Audible is another way to support the show. And you can get Audible through this link. You get 1 free book and a 30-day free trial. It's at audibletrial.com/design recharge. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoy it. Thanks for the thumbs up and the comment and the share. I really appreciate it. Y'all have a good day. Lord, could I take a little bit more time? There's a wasp out there, so that's why I'm distracted. It's through a glass. It can't get me. I'm safe. Hey, I just wanted to say thanks so much for coming today and watching. Hit like if you're on YouTube, and if you're on Audible, not Audible, blah, blah. What? And how long can I get stuck on here? All these things keep popping up. Bloop, bloop, bloop. Anyway. So I feel like I should say something else. You know, I stick my foot in my mouth a lot. And I should really pay attention. Man, my bra's been showing the whole time. Anyway, we learned a lot today. I can't wait for you guys to hear it. We learned that owls are a symbol of being wise, and it comes from the god of Athena. I think we learned that today. Do you know that design really started back in the cave paintings? I don't even know what else is funny. I don't think anything else is funny. Nothing else has happened. I can't sleep. I'm stressed. I think we have a mouse. I know. And I think it's in the attic. I know it's in the attic. There's poop on the little, we have like one of those things you pull down and you go up the little stairs. There's poop on that. I really don't like mice. And I have a cat. She should be able to catch that sucker. I don't really have any good piece of advice. It's just processing something. I don't know. I feel like it's just a whole bunch of commercials here at the end. Probably not very good commercials either. Support the show at Patreon. Anyway, that's what it feels like. A little slimy. I think I'm better when maybe somebody else is on here with me. I'm just waiting for it to process. 10 seconds. Anyway, I don't know if I use any of this. I think I know how to stop it.